that voice in your head that's analyzing everything right now? It's not your ally, it's your prison guard. Friedrich Nietzsche would have called you a coward, and he'd be right. You think you're being thorough, cautious, intelligent. But what if your analytical mind, the very thing you pride yourself on, is actually your greatest enemy? You're not thinking deeply, you're hiding. Overthinking isn't a sign of intelligence. It's a sophisticated form of cowardice. Look at yourself honestly for once. How many opportunities have you missed because you were too busy considering all possible outcomes? How many connections have you failed to make because you were rehearsing the perfect thing to say? How many days of your finite life have you sacrificed at the altar of endless rumination? Nietzsche saw this pattern clearly, long before our modern epidemic of anxiety. The overthinking man is like someone who builds a dam but forgets to create an outlet. The pressure builds until something breaks, usually you. What most people call thinking is actually something else entirely. It's rumination, a toxic loop of the same thoughts circling endlessly, producing nothing but the illusion of progress and the reality of paralysis. You've been taught that more thinking is always better. More analysis, more consideration, more planning. But Nietzsche recognized this as the great self-deception of intellectual people. The doer alone learneth, he wrote. Not the thinker, the doer. Your endless internal debates aren't making you wiser, they're making you weaker. Every moment spent in that mental maze is a moment not spent fully alive, not spent expressing what Nietzsche called your will to power, your creative force in the world. The dangerous truth is that overthinking feels productive while accomplishing nothing. It feels like movement while keeping you perfectly still. And worst of all, it feels safe while actually being the riskiest choice you could make, the risk of a life unlived. What's happening in your brain when you overthink? Psychologists call it rumination, from the Latin word for chewing cud, like a cow endlessly re-chewing its food. You're processing the same thoughts over and over, extracting no new nutrition. Your brain convinces you that this time you'll solve the problem. This time you'll reach certainty. This time you'll eliminate all risk. But it's lying to you. The human condition is fundamentally uncertain. No amount of thinking can change that. Nietzsche understood this trap intimately. Despite being one of history's most profound thinkers, he wasn't advocating for more thinking. He was demanding more living. I assess the power of a will by how much resistance, pain, torture it endures and knows how to turn to its advantage. Not by how thoroughly it analyzes, but by what it endures and overcomes. When you overthink, you're not processing reality. You're hiding from it. You're not preparing for action. You're substituting thinking for action. And in Nietzsche's framework, this is a profound moral failure. Not because it's sinful, but because it's a rejection of life itself. Ask yourself, when was the last time your overthinking actually solved your problem? When did analyzing the same situation for the 100th time yield the breakthrough you needed? What if the truth is that your best decisions come not from exhaustive analysis, but from the wisdom of your body and intuition? Nietzsche wrote, "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy, yet you override your body's signals constantly in favor of more thinking." Modern neuroscience confirms what Nietzsche intuited. Your brain processes information and makes evaluations without conscious awareness. Your gut reactions, what scientists call somatic markers, are not random feelings. They're complex calculations happening beneath the surface of consciousness. But you don't trust them. You've been conditioned to believe that only explicit verbal reasoning counts as intelligence. So, you suppress your intuition and demand that everything pass through the bottleneck of conscious analysis, where it gets stuck. The overthinker's greatest lie is that more analysis leads to better outcomes. The research tells a different story. Studies show that for complex decisions, conscious deliberation often performs worse than unconscious processing. When you overthink, you focus on easily verbalized attributes while ignoring more important holistic factors. You literally think yourself into worse choices. The psychological damage is measurable. Psychologists have found that people who ruminate have higher rates of anxiety disorders, depression, and decreased life satisfaction. This isn't correlation, it's causation. Your overthinking directly generates your suffering. Every time you overthink, you're engaging in what Nietzsche would recognize as resentment, a form of self-poisoning where you turn your creative energy inward against yourself rather than outward into the world. Your overthinking isn't happening in a vacuum. Society rewards it. Education systems are built on it. Careers advance through it. We've created a culture that mistakes careful hesitation for wisdom and decisive action for recklessness. But look at the true innovators and creators throughout history. Were they paralyzed by analysis? Did Einstein overthink the theory of relativity? Did Mozart second-guess every note? Did Martin Luther King Jr. rewrite "I Have a Dream" until all risk was removed? Number. They possessed what Nietzsche called the courage of one's convictions. Not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act despite it. The capacity to say, "This is enough thinking, now is the time for doing." You're paying a steep price for your overthinking, whether you recognize it or not. The psychological toll is obvious: anxiety, depression, decision fatigue. But the physical costs are just as real. Chronic rumination triggers stress responses. Your body can't distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. Your immunity weakens. Your sleep suffers. Your digestion falters. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest study of adult life ever conducted, found a clear correlation between rumination and decreased physical health. Your overthinking isn't just hurting your mind, it's literally shortening your life. Every hour spent in circular thinking is an hour lost to living, an hour that accelerates cellular aging and immune dysfunction. Think that's an exaggeration. Researchers measuring telomere length, a marker of cellular aging, found that chronic overthinkers showed the same cellular deterioration as people 10 years older. Your body experiences your mental loops as continuous stress, triggering the same physiological responses as actual danger. The social costs are even more insidious. While you're mentally rehearsing the perfect response, the genuine moment for connection passes. While you're weighing all possible interpretations of someone's message, the relationship stagnates. While you're contemplating the ideal career move, others are building actual careers through imperfect action. Research on interpersonal attraction consistently shows that excessive self-monitoring, the social version of overthinking, makes you appear less authentic and less attractive to others. People sense your hesitation, your calculation, your absence from the present moment. They don't experience you. They experience your carefully constructed facade. The most painful irony? Studies show that overthinkers believe they're gaining insight through rumination. They believe they're solving problems, understanding themselves better, preparing for the future. Yet longitudinal research reveals the opposite. Chronic overthinkers show decreased self-knowledge and poor decision outcomes over time. The very tool you think is helping you is actively harming you. But the existential cost is what would have troubled Nietzsche most. The life unlived is how he might describe it. Every moment spent overthinking is a moment not spent becoming who you truly are, not spent expressing your will to power, your creative force, and unique contribution. You're essentially choosing to be what Nietzsche called the last man, safe, comfortable, unchallenged, rather than striving toward the Übermensch, the higher self that embraces life in all its painful glory. What happens when an entire civilization overthinks? We're living the answer, a culture of risk aversion, institutions paralyzed by analysis, leaders who mistake indecision for carefulness, innovation stifled by endless deliberation. The very problems that threaten our collective future, climate change, inequality, democratic erosion, remain unsolved not for lack of solutions, but for lack of decisive action. Nietzsche saw this coming. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warned of a future where people would become smaller, more cautious, more concerned with comfort than greatness. They have their little pleasures for the day and their little pleasures for the night, but they have a regard for health. Sound familiar? We've become a society that prioritizes the avoidance of discomfort over the pursuit of meaningful achievement. Let's be brutally honest about what's really happening when you overthink. You're not being thorough. You're being afraid. You're not being careful. You're being paralyzed. You're not respecting complexity. You're avoiding responsibility. Would you respect someone who never took a definitive stand? Who always needed more information before acting? Who could argue every side but commit to none? Then why do you respect this behavior in yourself? Nietzsche would view your overthinking as a rejection of your own power, a form of life denial. I tell you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. But overthinking attempts to eliminate all chaos, all uncertainty, all risk. And in doing so, it eliminates all possibility of greatness. Think about your heroes. Were they overthinkers? Or were they people of action, people who moved forward with incomplete information, people who trusted themselves enough to leap? The tragedy is that overthinking creates exactly what it tries to avoid: increased suffering, decreased performance, impaired decision-making. Studies of emergency room doctors show that the best diagnoses come not from exhaustive analysis of every symptom, but from pattern recognition based on experience. When these doctors are forced to verbalize their reasoning process, to overthink, their diagnostic accuracy actually decreases. The same applies to you. Your most skilled performances, whether playing music, engaging in conversation, solving problems, or making decisions, happen when you access the wisdom of your non-conscious mind, rather than forcing everything through explicit analysis. But some situations genuinely require careful thought. You protest. Of course they do. But there's a world of difference between productive thinking and unproductive rumination. Productive thinking leads to decisions and actions. It has a clear end point. It engages with reality rather than endless hypotheticals. Unproductive rumination, by contrast, has no end point. It seeks a certainty that doesn't exist. It creates problems rather than solving them. It makes mountains of molehills and molehills of mountains, unable to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't. But some situations genuinely require careful thought, you protest. Of course they do. But there's a world of difference between productive thinking and unproductive rumination. Productive thinking leads to decisions and actions. It has a clear end point. It engages with reality rather than endless hypotheticals. Unproductive rumination, by contrast, has no end point. It seeks a certainty that doesn't exist. It creates problems rather than solving them. It makes mountains of molehills and molehills of mountains, unable to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't. The difference is neurologically measurable. Productive thinking activates the prefrontal cortex and results in creative solutions and closure. Rumination activates the default mode network associated with self-referential processing, essentially, your brain talking to itself about itself. It's mental masturbation that provides momentary relief, but no lasting satisfaction or progress. Ask yourself, are you thinking to prepare for action or thinking to avoid it? Are you processing reality or hiding from it? Are you moving toward a decision or circling the same territory endlessly? Nietzsche himself was certainly a deep thinker, but his thinking was in service to life affirmation, not life avoidance. He thought to clarify action, not to replace it. Even in his sickest years, plagued by migraines and near blindness, he produced work that changed the course of philosophy. He didn't wait for perfect health or perfect clarity. He acted with the resources available to him. Your overthinking often masquerades as intellectual sophistication, as careful consideration, as due diligence. But Nietzsche would have seen through this charade immediately. There is a false saying, he wrote. How can someone who can't save himself save others? Suppose I have the key to your chains. Why should your lock and my lock be the same? Translation. Your belief that you must solve all your internal debates before taking meaningful action is false. You don't need perfect clarity to act effectively. You don't need complete confidence to make valuable contributions. The key that unlocks your paralysis is action itself, not more thinking about action. So, what's the alternative to overthinking? Nietzsche offers several paths forward. First, embrace what he called Amor Fati, love of fate. My formula for greatness in a human being, Nietzsche wrote, is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. This doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means fully engaging with life as it is, not as you wish it were. It means acting within reality's constraints rather than endlessly theorizing about how to escape them. The overthinker wastes enormous energy fighting against what is, replaying past events, imagining alternative scenarios, wishing for different circumstances. This mental resistance creates suffering without changing reality. Amor Fati means redirecting that energy toward creative engagement with life as it actually presents itself to you. Second, trust your body's wisdom. There is more reason in your body than in your best wisdom, Nietzsche insisted. Your gut reactions, your physical responses, your intuitive flashes, these aren't distractions from good thinking. They're valuable data, often more reliable than your analytical mind. When making decisions, check in with your body. How does each option feel physically? Where do you sense expansion, energy, alignment? Where do you feel contraction, heaviness, resistance? Your body knows what your overthinking mind obscures. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's neurologically sound. Your body processes information through the enteric nervous system, sometimes called your second brain, and vagus nerve, sending signals that manifest as intuitions and physical sensations. These systems integrate complex environmental data your conscious mind cannot process at once. Ignoring them is like refusing to use most of your cognitive resources. Third, practice Nietzsche's concept of the eternal recurrence. Ask yourself, would I be willing to live this exact life, with all its decisions and actions, over and over for eternity? This thought experiment cuts through overthinking instantly. It forces you to consider what truly matters, not perfect decisions, but meaningful ones. If you knew you'd relive today endlessly, would you spend it ruminating or acting? Would you waste precious hours in circular thinking or engage fully with the world? Would you postpone joy for some hypothetical future or claim it now? The eternal recurrence isn't just philosophical abstraction. It's a practical tool for decision-making that eliminates the paralysis of perfectionism. When faced with a choice, ask, would I choose this path if I had to repeat it forever? The answer clarifies what you truly value, not what you think you should value or what others expect you to choose. Fourth, recognize that action creates clarity that thinking alone never can. It is only by means of forgetfulness that man can ever reach the point of fancying himself to possess a truth, wrote Nietzsche. Meaning, you must forget the infinite complexity of a situation to act within it. You must simplify to move forward. Action itself produces information that no amount of thinking can generate. You learn by doing, by succeeding and failing in the real world, not in the theoretical realm of endless analysis. This is why entrepreneurs emphasize validated learning through real-world testing rather than perfect planning. It's why therapists focus on behavioral activation rather than just insight for treating depression. It's why artists create drafts rather than perfecting concepts in their minds. Action generates data. thinking merely recycles existing information. Fifth, remember that overthinking is often just your ego protecting itself. By never fully committing, you never have to face full failure. By always considering options, you avoid the vulnerability of a choice. By staying in thought, you escape the messiness of action. Nietzsche would call this cowardice, plain and simple. Not moral cowardice, but existential cowardice. The unwillingness to participate fully in life's struggles and transformations. The overthinker wants guarantees before acting. But as Nietzsche knew, there are no guarantees in life except that it ends. Live dangerously, he advised. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Not because danger is intrinsically good, but because the alternative, a life constrained by excessive caution, is no life at all. Look at children before overthinking corrupts them. They try, fail, adjust, and try again, all without the paralysis of excessive analysis. They learn rapidly precisely because they act readily. What if you approached your challenges with a child's willingness to act and adapt, rather than an adult's tendency to analyze and hesitate? Children don't deliberate about whether they're ready to walk. They don't calculate the optimal strategy for language acquisition. They don't question whether they're qualified to explore. They simply act, fail, learn, and act again. Their learning isn't inhibited by fear of judgment or perfectionism. And as a result, they learn more in 5 years than most adults learn in 50. What would your life look like if you approached it with that same uninhibited engagement? If you valued learning over being right? If you prioritized experience over analysis? If you trusted the wisdom of action over the false security of endless deliberation? Now, for some practical techniques to break the overthinking cycle. Set time limits for decisions. Most decisions deserve minutes or hours of consideration, not days or weeks. Complex life choices might merit longer, but even then, extended deliberation often diminishes returns rather than improving outcomes. Implement the 70% rule, used by many effective leaders. Once you have 70% of the information you ideally want and feel 70% confident, act. Waiting for 100% is usually impossible and counterproductive. Practice exposure therapy for your thoughts. Write down your worst-case scenarios explicitly. Most overthinkers catastrophize vaguely. Making fears concrete often reveals their unlikelihood or manageability. Use physical movement to break rumination cycles. Overthinking happens in your head. Movement engages your body. Walking, running, dancing, anything that pulls you out of your mind and into physical reality can reset harmful thought patterns. Adopt decisiveness as a practice, not a personality trait. Start with small, low-stakes decisions made quickly and firmly. Build the muscle of choosing without second-guessing. Gradually apply this skill to larger decisions. Perhaps most importantly, recognize when you need to think less, not more. In the mountains of truth, you never climb in vain, wrote Nietzsche. But not all thinking is climbing toward truth. Much of it is pacing nervously at the base of the mountain. The hardest truth for overthinkers to accept is that most decisions don't require extensive analysis. Most situations have fairly obvious next steps. Most opportunities must be seized promptly or lost forever. What if the voice telling you to think more carefully is actually the voice of fear? What if your demand for certainty is actually a demand for safety that life cannot provide? What if your refined analytical skills are being misused to justify inaction? Nietzsche would argue that your overthinking is not just a habit, but a moral choice, a choice against life itself. The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously, not recklessly, but with the courage to act before all doubts are resolved. Think of the people who've most influenced history. Did they overthink? Or did they act decisively based on strong convictions? Did they wait for perfect clarity, or move forward with the clarity they had? The most bitter irony for overthinkers is that the actions they most regret are usually not the ones they took, but the ones they didn't take. The opportunities not seized, the connections not made, the risks not taken. On your deathbed, you won't wish you'd spent more time analyzing, you'll wish you'd spent more time living. Overthinking is a particularly cruel form of self-sabotage because it masquerades as responsibility. It feels prudent while stealing your life force. It feels thoughtful while disconnecting you from your deepest wisdom. It feels safe while exposing you to the greatest danger of all, a life of hesitation rather than wholehearted engagement. You stand now at a philosophical crossroads that Nietzsche would immediately recognize. Before you are two paths, one of endless deliberation and one of decisive action. The path of overthinking offers the illusion of safety. It promises that with enough analysis, you can avoid all pain, all failure, all regret. But this is the great lie. No amount of thinking can provide these guarantees, and in avoiding the risks of action, you guarantee the emptiness of inaction. The path of action offers no such comforts. It guarantees struggle, uncertainty, occasional failure, but it also offers the only route to what Nietzsche called becoming who you are, the authentic expression of your unique creative force. This is the essence of Nietzsche's will to power, not power over others, but power to express your nature fully, to create according to your vision, to transform yourself and your world through decisive engagement rather than endless contemplation. You've been misled about what constitutes wisdom. True wisdom isn't found in perfect analysis, but in the courage to act on incomplete information. It isn't measured by how much you know, but by how purposefully you live, despite not knowing everything. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, wrote Nietzsche. Your overthinking focuses endlessly on the how while neglecting the why. But when your why is strong enough, the how becomes secondary. Action follows naturally from purpose. The chronic overthinker has abandoned purpose in favor of process, meaning in favor of method. This is precisely what Nietzsche warned against when he proclaimed God is dead. He wasn't merely making a theological statement, but identifying a crisis of meaning that would plague modern humans. Without clear purpose, you become trapped in infinite regress, endless analysis, paralysis through excessive examination. Every moment you spend overthinking, you're making a choice against your own potential greatness. Every hour lost to rumination is an hour not spent creating, connecting, experiencing, transforming. These aren't dramatic exaggerations. They're the mathematical reality of a finite life. Time spent in circular thinking is time permanently lost to actual living. Consider the pattern of your life so far. How many of your proudest moments came from careful, risk-free calculation? How many came from courage, from trust in yourself, from leaping before you felt completely ready? The truth that most overthinkers never confront is that certainty is not a prerequisite for meaningful action. The most significant human achievements, artistic, scientific, political, personal, emerged not from perfect clarity, but from the willingness to act despite substantial uncertainty. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "The doer alone learneth, not the contemplator, not the analyzer, not the ruminator. The doer, the one who translates thought into action, who tests ideas against reality, who refines understanding through direct experience rather than endless speculation." What if, starting today, you committed to being a person of action rather than endless contemplation? What if you decided that done is better than perfect? What if you embraced Nietzsche's Amor, Fati, loving what is rather than endlessly questioning what might be? The truth is that you already know what to do in most situations. Your overthinking isn't seeking necessary information. It's avoiding necessary action. It's not clarifying your path. It's preventing you from walking it. It's not making you wiser. It's making you smaller. Nietzsche would challenge you to recognize this moment for what it is, an opportunity to choose life over fear, to choose expression over repression, to choose the messy reality of action over the clean abstraction of thought. What overthinking ultimately represents is a fundamental mistrust of yourself, of life, of the unfolding process of existence. It assumes that without your conscious micromanagement, disaster will ensue. But what if the opposite is true? What if your constant interference is precisely what blocks the natural intelligence of life from operating through you? Trust yourself, Nietzsche would insist, not blindly or foolishly, but fundamentally. Trust that you can handle whatever comes. Trust that failure will teach you more than endless speculation ever could. Trust that your inherent capacities, when exercised through action rather than paralyzed through analysis, are more than sufficient for the challenges you face. This isn't positive thinking or wishful optimism. It's a clear-eyed recognition of human resilience and adaptability. These qualities cannot develop through thought alone. They require the stimulus of action, the feedback of real-world engagement, the transformation that comes only through doing. Your overthinking has one primary function: to maintain the illusion of control in an inherently uncontrollable world. But this illusion comes at the cost of actually influencing what can be influenced. By fixating on controlling outcomes through perfect analysis, you surrender your genuine power to affect reality through committed action. The time for analysis is over. The time for action is now. Not tomorrow, after more thinking. Not next week, when you feel more certain. Not someday, when all doubts are resolved. Now this moment, with whatever clarity you currently possess. Sudden silence, black screen, then single powerful drumbeat. The snake, which cannot cast its skin, has to die, wrote Nietzsche. As well the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions, they cease to be mind. Your overthinking is that old skin that needs shedding. It served its purpose once, perhaps protecting you from perceived dangers, but now it constrains you. It prevents growth. It stifles the new self waiting to emerge. What one action have you been postponing through overthinking? Name it. Not in your head. Say it aloud. This is not a theoretical exercise. This is your life calling you to participation rather than observation. Now, commit to taking that action within 24 hours. Not perfectly, not after more analysis, just taking it, imperfectly, incompletely, but definitively. Remember, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. The discomfort of decisive action strengthens you. The paralysis of overthinking weakens you. Choose strength, choose growth, choose life. Nietzsche's philosophy wasn't meant for comfortable contemplation. It was a call to courageous action, a demand to live fully despite life's inherent uncertainties and sufferings. The overthinking mind will immediately resist this message. It will find reasons to dismiss it, qualifications to add, exceptions to note. This is precisely what Nietzsche would expect. The mind that has become accustomed to endless rumination will defend this habit vigorously. It will insist on its necessity, its sophistication, its prudence. But ask yourself, what has this habit truly given you? Security? Hardly. Clarity? Rarely. Fulfillment? Never. Every wisdom tradition across human history, not just Nietzsche's philosophy, recognizes the same fundamental truth. Life is lived forward, not backward. Understanding comes through engagement, not abstraction. Meaning emerges through commitment, not endless deliberation. The Buddhist tradition calls your overthinking the chattering monkey mind, and prescribes meditation not to think more clearly, but to recognize that you are not your thoughts. The Stoics advocated focusing only on what you can control, primarily your own responses and actions, not outcomes. Indigenous wisdom emphasizes direct experience over abstract knowledge. Even modern psychology confirms that behavioral activation precedes motivational change, not the reverse. All point to the same conclusion. Action precedes clarity more often than clarity precedes action. You have been waiting for certainty before acting, but certainty comes primarily through action itself. Start small, if you must. One decision made without second guessing. One risk taken without exhaustive analysis. One step forward without complete confidence in the outcome. Notice what happens, not just the external result, but the internal shift, the relief of decision, the energy of movement, the clarity that emerges from engagement rather than rumination. Then take another step, and another. Build the muscle of decisive action until it becomes stronger than the habit of overthinking, until you trust your capacity to respond to what arises more than your ability to predict and control what might happen. The greatest risk isn't making the wrong decision. It's allowing indecision to rob you of the opportunity to make any meaningful impact at all. It's dying with your music still inside you because you spent too long tuning the instrument. Today, play your note, take your step, make your choice. The overthinking ends now. The living begins. Remember what Nietzsche knew. Without music, life would be a mistake. Your life is not meant to be a perfect performance, but a genuine expression. Not a problem to be solved through analysis, but an experience to be embraced through action. Not a theoretical exercise, but a lived reality. So put down the script of endless deliberation. Stop rehearsing for a perfect life and start living the imperfect one you actually have. Trust that your capacity to adapt is greater than your ability to predict. Know that your resilience in response to failure will teach you more than your attempts to avoid failure ever could. The world doesn't need more careful thinkers afraid to act. It needs more courageous actors willing to think, learn, adjust, and act again. It needs what you could become if you stopped hiding in the labyrinth of your own mind and stepped into the open field of engaged living. This is Nietzsche's ultimate challenge to you. Will you choose the comfortable familiarity of overthinking or the uncomfortable growth of decisive action? Will you remain what you have been or become what you might be? The choice is yours, but know this, it is a choice you make not once, but continuously. In each moment, with each opportunity, facing each uncertainty, you decide again, more thinking or more living. Choose wisely, choose courageously, choose now.